season 4.
Nia Thompson is one of those rare kids who was born to entertain.
I really believed I had talent. I'm a very dramatic person, so. And my mom also said that when I was younger, I would be humming Sesame Street. So I always had the talent.
She's been on Access Hollywood and modeled on the Tamron Hall Show, channeling actress Cynthia Erivo and nailing it.
Some stories begin with a name that once echoed in crowded rooms, remembered for talent, discipline, and early success. Others begin quietly, behind closed doors, far from public view. This story sits between those two worlds. What appeared stable from the outside concealed a series of moments that would later become evidence. Investigators would retrace timelines, examine messages, and reconstruct a night that ended differently than anyone expected. At first, there were only fragments, a call placed, a door opened, a sequence interrupted. As details emerged, familiar assumptions began to fall away. This case is not about sudden chaos, but about gradual escalation, overlooked signals, and a private reality that unfolded out of sight. What happened cannot be understood in a single moment. It requires stepping backward, examining context, and following facts where they lead, even when they reveal more questions than answers. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. For years, the name Imani Dia Smith appeared in playbills rather than police records. She was known publicly for her early work in theater, associated with discipline, performance schedules, and structured routines. That public recognition resurfaced abruptly when her name appeared in national headlines under very different circumstances. Media attention intensified, not because the incident occurred in isolation, but because it involved someone whose early life had unfolded under public observation. The contrast between recognition and anonymity became central to the coverage. This case drew attention because it forced a reassessment of how early visibility intersects with adult privacy. At the center of the story is a direct question investigators and reporters alike sought to understand. How did a life defined by structure, opportunity, and promise reach a point of lethal violence? Imani Smith was raised in a family environment that supported early artistic development. From a young age, she was introduced to structured schedules involving rehearsals, performances, and instruction. Entry into professional performing arts required discipline uncommon for children her age. Her early career involved compliance with demanding routines, time management, and adult supervision. These experiences shaped her ability to follow structure and expectations. As she aged out of child performance roles, Smith transitioned away from public stages. This shift marked a move toward a more private adulthood, a path taken by many former child performers. She pursued education and employment outside of entertainment, focusing on stability rather than visibility. Reports indicate she worked consistently and maintained defined personal goals. Motherhood became a central organizing feature of her daily life. Her responsibilities included childcare, household management, and employment coordination. Family members later described her as organized, self-reliant, and persistent. She was known for maintaining routines and handling responsibilities independently. These patterns suggested resilience developed through both early professional demands and adult responsibilities. At the time of the incident, Smith was living in Edison, New Jersey. Her residence was not associated with public attention or professional performance. Daily routines reportedly involved work obligations, childcare, and domestic responsibilities. Financial pressures common to young parents were present, though no public records suggest acute financial crisis. Her domestic environment included a romantic partner with whom she shared living space. The private nature of the household meant that most daily interactions were not visible to outsiders. Neighbors later described typical residential activity, with no continuous disturbances reported prior to the incident. This lack of external indicators became relevant during the investigation, highlighting how limited outside awareness can be in domestic situations. Outsiders could observe routine behaviors but had no direct insight into private interactions, disputes, or relationship stressors unless they escalated visibly or audibly. Investigators later noted this separation between observable normalcy and private conflict. Smith met her boyfriend through personal connections, and the relationship developed over time rather than abruptly. As the relationship progressed, shared living arrangements were established. Responsibilities within the household included childcare and financial contributions, though specific divisions were not publicly detailed. Accounts from acquaintances indicate the relationship was generally perceived as stable. However, later investigative findings suggested that disputes did occur privately. No publicly available court records indicate prior restraining orders or documented domestic violence complaints before the incident. Investigators examined the relationship timeline, focusing on cohabitation, dependency patterns, and any indications of control or conflict escalation. While some warning signs were later discussed in media reporting, many elements only became apparent after the incident, underscoring how certain dynamics remain undocumented until examined retroactively. In the days leading up to the incident, Smith was reportedly engaged in her usual routines. There were no public reports of unusual behavior or announcements suggesting imminent danger. Communications between Smith and her partner, including calls and messages, were later reviewed by investigators to establish context. Friends and family did not report clear behavioral changes that signaled immediate risk. However, investigators later identified certain interactions as significant based on timing and content. These moments, while appearing ordinary in isolation, gained relevance once the broader timeline was reconstructed. Law enforcement later emphasized that critical developments often emerge only when communication records are examined alongside physical evidence and witness statements. On the night of the incident, events unfolded within the shared residence. Investigators established a minute-by-minute timeline using emergency call records, phone data, and physical evidence. The location was confined to the home, limiting the number of potential witnesses. What is known comes primarily from forensic findings and initial statements. What remains alleged is subject to ongoing legal proceedings. At a specific point, emergency services were contacted. The caller's identity and statements became central to the investigation. First responders arrived to find Smith with severe injuries. The scene was secured immediately, and emergency medical personnel initiated life-saving measures. The condition of the residence was documented, including signs of struggle and the presence of items later classified as evidence. Initial statements were taken at the scene and later compared against forensic findings. Any inconsistencies were flagged for further investigation. Smith was transported to a nearby hospital, where medical staff continued emergency treatment. Despite these efforts, she was later pronounced dead. The official pronouncement triggered standard procedures, including notification of next of kin and transfer of the case to homicide investigators. Law enforcement secured the residence as a crime scene. Evidence collection included physical objects, digital devices, and environmental documentation. Early observations focused on injury patterns, weapon identification, and scene consistency. Investigators cataloged items of evidentiary significance, including potential weapons and electronic records. These materials formed the basis of subsequent charges and legal actions. Within a short period, authorities identified a suspect based on the totality of evidence, leading to an arrest and formal charges. Once the residence was secured, the case moved quickly into a formal homicide investigation. Detectives conducted separate interviews with individuals connected to the scene, beginning with the person present at the time emergency services were contacted. These interviews were conducted multiple times, both at the scene and later in controlled environments, to document consistency and clarify timelines. Investigators focused on reconstructing events through forensic evidence. Bloodstain pattern analysis, location of injuries, and scene layout were examined to determine movement within a residence. Items recovered from the scene were cataloged, photographed, and sent for laboratory testing. Particular attention was paid to any object that could be identified as a weapon. An autopsy was performed to determine cause and manner of death. Medical examiners documented the number, location, and severity of wounds, as well as defensive injuries. The findings indicated homicide, establishing that the injuries were inflicted by another individual rather than accidental or self-inflicted. Digital evidence played a central role. Investigators reviewed cell phone records, including call logs, text messages, and location data. Any surveillance footage from nearby residences or external cameras was examined to confirm movements before and after the incident. This data allowed investigators to align statements with verifiable timestamps. As interviews progressed, inconsistencies emerged between initial statements and forensic findings. Differences in timelines, descriptions of movements, and explanations for injuries were noted. These discrepancies narrowed investigative focus toward a single suspect based on access, opportunity, and contradictions that could not be reconciled with physical evidence. Following the review of forensic, medical, and digital evidence, authorities moved forward with an arrest. The timing of the arrest reflected the completion of preliminary evidence analysis rather than public pressure. Law enforcement officials stated that the decision was based on the totality of evidence collected. The suspect was formally charged with multiple offenses, including murder. These charges carried significant legal weight, reflecting prosecutors' assessment that the evidence supported intentional or knowing conduct resulting in death. Additional charges related to weapon use and domestic circumstances were also filed. Prosecutors presented an initial narrative focused on a domestic confrontation that escalated into fatal violence. This narrative relied on forensic alignment, injury analysis, and inconsistencies in the suspect's account. The defense responded by challenging interpretations of evidence and emphasizing the presumption of innocence. Bail considerations were addressed during initial court appearances. Given the severity of the charges, the court ordered the defendant held in custody. Factors considered included flight risk, danger to the community, and the nature of the alleged offense. Court proceedings began with arraignment and pre-trial hearings. During these appearances, charges were formally read, and the defendant entered a plea. Defense attorneys filed motions related to evidence admissibility, interrogation procedures, and pretrial discovery. Prosecutors outlined the evidence they intended to present, including forensic reports, digital records, and expert testimony. The defense contested aspects of evidence handling, interpretation, and intent. Both sides prepared to address the credibility of statements and the sequencing of events. Key testimonies were expected from law enforcement officers, forensic specialists, medical examiners, and individuals familiar with the household. Certain facts, such as the cause of death, were uncontested. Other elements, including intent and sequence of actions, remained central points of dispute. Media coverage expanded during this phase, largely focusing on the contrast between the victim's early public life and the private circumstances of the case. Public reaction remained measured, with reporting emphasizing procedural developments rather than speculation. In the immediate aftermath, Smith's family issued statements requesting privacy while acknowledging public interest. Arrangements were made to ensure the care and stability of her child, with family members assuming responsibility. Community members organized vigils and memorial gatherings, emphasizing awareness rather than commentary on the legal case. These events highlighted broader concerns about domestic violence and unseen risk factors within private households. Advocacy organizations referenced the case in discussions about intervention, reporting barriers, and the importance of recognizing early warning signs. While the legal process focused on individual accountability, community conversations addressed systemic issues related to prevention and support. Despite extensive investigation, certain questions remain unresolved publicly. Some evidence has not been fully disclosed due to ongoing legal proceedings. Portions of digital data, including deleted communications or incomplete records, had not been fully explained in open court. Conflicting accounts continue to exist regarding the sequence of events leading up to the fatal injuries. Investigators addressed these discrepancies through forensic alignment, but some aspects remain subject to interpretation. Observers have noted the absence of documented prior incidents and debated how intervention might occur in situations with limited external indicators. These gaps highlight challenges faced by both families and institutions in identifying risk before escalation. As of the most recent updates, the case remains active within the court system. Pre-trial proceedings continue, with motions pending and trial scheduling underway. The defendant remains in custody, awaiting further hearings. The next steps in the justice process include evidentiary rulings, potential plea negotiations, or trial proceedings. Outcomes will depend on judicial determinations and jury evaluation of presented evidence. The case of Imani Dia Smith illustrates how public recognition can coexist with private vulnerability. Examining the facts requires separating reputation from circumstance and focusing on documented evidence rather than assumptions. Documenting cases like this serves a practical purpose. It preserves factual records, clarifies investigative processes, and contributes to broader understanding of how private conflicts can escalate without external awareness. The legal process continues to determine accountability, while the documented facts remain essential for transparency and public record.